December 2nd, 1966. 30,000 feet above North Vietnam, Soviet-trained MiG-21 pilots banked through monsoon clouds, laughing over their radios. Below them, another formation of American jets approached, slow, predictable, loaded with bombs. Easy targets. The nimble 7-ton fish beds had already shot down 14 American aircraft without losing a single pilot. Soviet doctrine was working perfectly. American pilots relied too heavily on technology, flying their 16-ton F-4 Phantoms like flying trucks. Close-range cannon combat belonged to the agile, the skilled, the properly trained. But something was wrong with this formation. The approaching aircraft carried the electronic signature of F-105 Thunder Chiefs, the bomb-laden fighter bombers the MiGs had been massacring for months. Same radio frequencies, same flight paths, same jamming pods. But hidden inside those radar bays was technology the Soviets never suspected existed. American engineers had built a weapon system that could detect and kill enemy fighters from distances that Soviet pilots couldn't even imagine. The MiG pilots were about to discover that their 7-kilometer radar range had just become a death sentence. If you value forgotten military history, subscribe for more documented accounts. Comment your city. We're curious where these stories reach you. The monsoon clouds hung thick over North Vietnam as Senior Lieutenant Nguyen Van Kock adjusted his oxygen mask and scanned the gray horizon from the cockpit of his MiG-21. December had brought the seasonal rains, but it had also brought something far more valuable, a string of victories that had the pilots of the 921st Fighter Regiment feeling invincible. 14 American F-105 Thunder Chiefs destroyed in a single month, their burning wreckage scattered across the jungle canopy below. Not a single MiG lost. The mathematics of air combat had never looked so favorable. Kock keyed his radio, speaking in rapid Vietnamese to his wingman. "Maintain formation. Ground control reports another American formation approaching from the southeast." The familiar routine had become almost mechanical. American bomber formations followed predictable patterns. Same altitudes, same approach routes, same vulnerable moments when their heavily laden Thunder Chiefs became sitting ducks for the nimble fish beds. Soviet tactical doctrine emphasized patience, positioning, and the decisive strike. One pass, then haul ass. It worked because American pilots had grown complacent with their technological superiority. 300 miles south, Captain John Stone hunched over intelligence reports in the operations bunker at Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base, his coffee growing cold as he studied intercept patterns and radio frequency logs. The young officer had spent weeks analyzing North Vietnamese tactics, and what he discovered made his stomach tighten with professional frustration. The enemy wasn't just lucky, they were reading American formations like an open book. Every F-105 strike package broadcast its intentions through predictable routing, standard radio procedures, and identical electronic signatures. The North Vietnamese Signal Intelligence Network in Hanoi had become expert at distinguishing between different American aircraft types, allowing MiG controllers to vector their fighters toward vulnerable bomb-laden Thunder Chiefs while avoiding the better-armed F-4 Phantoms. Stone looked up as Colonel Robin Olds entered the briefing room, the wing commander's presence immediately commanding attention from every officer present. Olds had earned his reputation the hard way. 13 confirmed kills in World War II, flying P-38s and P-51s against the Luftwaffe over Europe. Now he faced a different enemy using different tactics, but his fighter pilot instincts remained razor sharp. "What have you got for me, Stone?" Olds asked, settling into a chair and fixing the captain with an intense stare. "Sir, the pattern is consistent across every engagement," Stone began, spreading out charts showing flight paths and intercept vectors. "The North Vietnamese ground controllers can identify our F-105s from at least 50 miles out. They're using electronic intelligence, monitoring our radio frequencies, tracking our jamming pods, analyzing our formation geometry. By the time the MiGs launch, they know exactly what type of aircraft they're intercepting and where to find the most vulnerable targets." Olds studied the data with the methodical attention of a predator analyzing prey. His World War II experience had taught him that successful fighter operations required more than individual skill. They demanded tactical innovation and the ability to exploit enemy assumptions. So they're expecting F-105s, he said slowly. What happens if we give them something else instead? The concept that would become Operation Bolo began forming in that moment, born from the intersection of Stone's analytical mind and Old's combat instincts. The F-4 Phantom possessed capabilities that Soviet tactical doctrine simply couldn't account for. While the MiG-21's RP-21 radar could detect targets at 7 kilometers, the Phantom's AN/APQ-120 system reached out beyond 60 nautical miles. The AM-7 Sparrow missile could engage maneuvering targets at 25 to 35-mile ranges, distances where MiG pilots would have no warning of incoming death. But the technology alone wasn't enough. Success would require deception on a scale that challenged traditional fighter pilot thinking. Instead of relying on superior equipment to win through brute force, American crews would need to become actors, convincing North Vietnamese intelligence analysts that heavily armed F-4 fighters were actually vulnerable F-105 bombers. The plan would demand perfect execution of electronic warfare procedures, precise timing, and the willingness to stake everything on a single massive engagement. Stone pulled out frequency charts and electronic warfare specifications, his excitement growing as the operational possibilities became clear. We can mimic their electronic signature perfectly, sir. Same jamming pods, same radio procedures, same formation geometry. The QRC-160 pods we carry are identical to the ones on the Thunder Chiefs. From the ground controller's perspective, we'll look exactly like another F-105 strike package. Olds nodded, already visualizing how the engagement would unfold. His Phantoms would carry full air-to-air loadouts, AIM-7 Sparrows for long-range kills and AIM-9 Sidewinders for close combat. When the MiGs scrambled to intercept what they believed were easy bomber targets, they would instead face the most capable air superiority fighters in the American inventory, flown by crews trained specifically for air-to-air combat. The mathematics of the engagement favored the Americans in ways that Soviet doctrine had never contemplated. While MiG-21 pilots trained for visual range combat and gun runs, starting from 5,000 feet above their targets, F-4 crews practiced beyond visual range intercepts using radar-guided missiles. The technological gap wasn't just significant, it represented a fundamental shift in how air combat would be fought. As December moved toward its end, the pieces of Operation Bolo fell into place. Weather delays would push the mission from January 1st to January 2nd, but the extra time allowed for more detailed planning and crew briefings. The North Vietnamese had grown confident in their tactical superiority, never suspecting that American ingenuity was about to turn their own assumptions into a fatal weakness. The age of beyond visual range combat was about to announce itself over the skies of North Vietnam, and Soviet air combat doctrine would never be the same. The technical specifications told the real story of what was about to unfold over North Vietnam. Captain Stone spread the radar performance charts across the briefing table, his finger tracing the dramatic differences that would determine life and death in the coming engagement. The F-4 Phantom's NAPQ-120 radar system represented a quantum leap beyond anything the Soviets had imagined possible in a fighter aircraft. While the MiG-21's compact RP-21 radar, squeezed into its shock cone nose, could detect fighter-sized targets at 7 kilometers, the Phantom's massive dish antenna reached out beyond 60 nautical miles with multiple target tracking capability. The implications staggered anyone who truly understood air combat mathematics. An AIM-7 Sparrow missile launched from 30 miles would cover the distance to its target in less than 2 minutes, traveling at Mach 4 speeds with semi-active radar homing guidance that made evasion nearly impossible for an unaware pilot. By contrast, MiG-21 pilots trained for engagements that began with visual contact, typically at ranges measured in thousands of feet rather than tens of miles. Soviet tactical doctrine assumed that both sides would detect each other simultaneously, leading to the classic turning fight where pilot skill and aircraft maneuverability would determine the victor. Colonel Old studied the weapon specifications with the intensity of a chess master analyzing an opponent's weaknesses. Each F-4 would carry 4 AIM-7 Sparrows on fuselage stations and 4 M9 Sidewinders on wing pylons, 8 air-to-air missiles per aircraft compared to the MiG-21's 2 infrared-guided Atoll missiles and twin-barrel GSH-23 cannon. The numerical advantage was significant, but the technological gap was revolutionary. Where Soviet pilots expected to fight at ranges measured in nautical miles, American crews could engage from distances where their targets couldn't even detect the incoming threat. The radar system's capabilities extended far beyond simple detection ranges. Stone explained how the AN/APQ-120 offered selectable search patterns, wide 120-degree sweeps for general surveillance, or narrow 60-degree beams for target tracking. The system could operate at ranges from 10 nautical miles for close combat up to 200 miles for long-range surveillance. Most importantly, the radar's 3-bar scan capability allowed simultaneous tracking of multiple targets while maintaining lock-on for missile guidance. Soviet interceptor doctrine had never contemplated facing such overwhelming technological superiority. The strategic implications became clear as Stone outlined Soviet ground-controlled intercept procedures. North Vietnamese air defense relied on a network of over 200 ground radar facilities to guide MiG intercepts, positioning the nimble fighters for surprise attacks against predictable American formations. The system worked brilliantly when both sides operated under similar technological constraints, allowing superior tactics and pilot skill to offset numerical disadvantages. But the GCI network's effectiveness depended on Soviet assumptions about engagement ranges and detection capabilities that American technology had rendered obsolete. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel James entered the briefing room as Stone detailed the electronic warfare aspects of Operation Bolo. The deputy operations officer brought combat experience from both Korea and World War II, providing crucial perspective on how air combat had evolved across 3 different technological generations. James understood that the F-4 represented more than incremental improvement. It embodied a fundamental shift toward radar-guided beyond visual range combat that would make traditional dogfighting skills secondary to electronic warfare, proficiency, and missile employment tactics. The deception plan required perfect execution of electronic signatures that would convince North Vietnamese intelligence analysts they were tracking F-105 Thunder Chiefs rather than F-4 Phantoms. Stone had spent weeks studying the electronic characteristics of both aircraft types, identifying the precise combination of jamming pod frequencies, radio procedures, and formation geometry that would create an irresistible target for MiG controllers. The QRC-160 electronic countermeasures pods carried by both aircraft types produced identical radar signatures, making the deception technically feasible if operationally challenging. Olds absorbed the technical details with growing confidence, recognizing that Operation Bolo would test American technological superiority against Soviet tactical doctrine in the most direct way possible. His F-4 crews had trained extensively in beyond visual range combat, practicing radar intercepts and missile employment at distances where enemy pilots would have no warning of incoming attack. The Phantom's size and weight, 16 tons compared to the MiG-21's 7 tons, had earned mockery from Soviet pilots who dismissed it as a flying truck. But those same characteristics enabled the installation of radar and weapons systems that would revolutionize air combat. The missile technology itself represented American engineering at its peak. The AIM-7 Sparrow used semi-active radar homing, requiring the launching aircraft to maintain target illumination throughout the missile's flight time. This constraint demanded sophisticated radar operators and precise tactical execution, but it enabled engagement ranges that Soviet doctrine had never contemplated. Early Sparrow variants had suffered reliability problems in Vietnam's tropical climate, but the AIM-70 and E models had matured into effective weapon systems when properly employed by well-trained crews. James pointed out the doctrinal revolution implicit in the F-4's original design philosophy. Early Phantom variants carried no internal cannon, reflecting Pentagon assumptions that radar-guided missiles had made close-in dogfighting obsolete. This radical departure from traditional fighter aircraft design embodied American confidence in technological solutions to combat problems. While Soviet pilots trained for cannon combat at ranges measured in hundreds of meters, American crews prepared for missile engagements at distances where targets appeared as radar blips rather than visual contacts. The briefing concluded with weather forecasts that would ultimately delay Operation Bolo by 24 hours. Monsoon conditions over North Vietnam threatened to obscure visual identification of targets and complicate radar tracking, but they also provided cloud cover that would mask American formations until the decisive moment of engagement. Stone felt the weight of operational responsibility as he finalized target folders and communications procedures. The success of Operation Bolo would validate or refute fundamental assumptions about the future of air combat, determining whether American technological superiority could overcome Soviet tactical expertise and numerical limitations. January 1st brought disappointing news to Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base as weather reconnaissance reported solid cloud cover over North Vietnam extending up to 25,000 feet. Colonel Old stood in the meteorology section studying satellite imagery that showed the monsoon system stalled over the target area, creating conditions that would compromise both visual identification and radar tracking effectiveness. The 24-hour delay frustrated crews who had spent weeks preparing for Operation Bolo, but it also provided additional time for final equipment checks and tactical refinements that would prove crucial to the mission's success. Captain Stone used the extra day to verify electronic warfare procedures with the QRC-160 jamming pod operators. Each F-4 would carry the identical electronic countermeasures equipment used by F-105 Thunder Chiefs, creating radar signatures indistinguishable from the bomb-laden fighter bombers that North Vietnamese controllers had learned to identify and target. The deception required precise coordination of jamming frequencies, radio call signs, and formation geometry that would convince ground-based intelligence analysts they were tracking another routine strike package, rather than a carefully planned air superiority trap. The automotive call signs selected for the mission reflected both operational security requirements and the scale of the planned engagement. 6 flights would participate. Old's flight led by the wing commander himself, followed by Ford, Rambler, Lincoln, Tempest, Plymouth, and Vespa flights. Each 4-ship formation would carry full air-to-air loadouts with specific tactical assignments designed to exploit the F-4's beyond visual range advantages, while minimizing exposure to MiG-21 strengths in close combat. The call signs would become part of aviation history, marking the moment when American technology decisively demonstrated its superiority over Soviet tactical doctrine. Lieutenant Colonel James spent January 1st conducting final briefings with flight leaders, emphasizing the critical importance of radar discipline and missile employment procedures. The success of Operation Bolo depended on crews maintaining formation integrity while operating their ANAPQ-120 radar systems at maximum effectiveness. Each Phantom would search different altitude bands and azimuth sectors, creating overlapping coverage that would detect incoming MiGs at ranges far beyond the enemy's ability to respond. The tactical coordination required represented a new level of sophistication in multi-aircraft operations. The electronic deception extended beyond simple jamming pod operations to include precise replication of F-105 communication procedures and navigation patterns. Stone had analyzed hundreds of hours of recorded radio traffic from previous Thunder Chief missions, identifying the subtle variations in pilot terminology and controller responses that North Vietnamese signals intelligence used to classify American formations. Operation Bolo crews would use identical phraseology, timing, and radio discipline to maintain the illusion until the moment of engagement. January 2nd dawned with clearing skies and favorable weather conditions over the target area. The 6 F-4 flights launched from Ubon in sequence, their departure times carefully calculated to arrive over Phuc Yen Air Base at 1500 hours, when North Vietnamese air defenses would be at peak readiness. Each Phantom carried 8 air-to-air missiles, 4 AM-7 Sparrows for beyond visual range engagements, and 4 AM-9 Sidewinders for close combat situations. The weapons load represented more firepower than entire World War II fighter squadrons had carried into combat. The formation proceeded north toward the target area, maintaining the same altitude, airspeed, and electronic signature that characterized F-105 strike packages. Ground-based radar operators in North Vietnam detected the approaching aircraft exactly as planned, interpreting the electronic signatures as another routine bombing mission against strategic targets near Hanoi. The over 200 radar facilities comprising the North Vietnamese air defense network began their familiar process of vectoring MiG interceptors toward what appeared to be vulnerable American bombers. Stone monitored radio frequencies from his position in Rambler flight, listening to the subtle changes in North Vietnamese ground control communications that indicated successful deception. The enemy controllers displayed their usual confidence, directing MiG-21 pilots toward intercept positions with the methodical precision that had proven so effective against previous F-105 formations. Soviet doctrine emphasized patience and positioning, allowing ground controllers to place their limited number of interceptors at maximum advantage against numerically superior but predictable American formations. The technological revolution hidden within the F-4's radar bays remained invisible to North Vietnamese intelligence analysts who had grown accustomed to reading American electronic signatures like an open book. The ANAPQ-120 systems carried by each Phantom possessed detection capabilities that exceeded anything Soviet engineers had imagined possible in a fighter-sized aircraft. While MiG-21 pilots prepared for visual range intercepts using tactics developed for cannon combat, American crews readied beyond visual range missiles that could engage targets at distances where the enemy would have no warning of incoming attack. As the formation approached the target area, Olds felt the familiar pre-combat tension that had sustained him through 2 wars and dozens of aerial engagements. The 60-mile detection range of his radar system provided situational awareness that World War II fighters could never have achieved, but the fundamental challenge remained unchanged: using superior technology and tactics to defeat a determined enemy operating under different assumptions. The next few minutes would determine whether American engineering superiority could overcome Soviet numerical advantages and tactical expertise. The deception reached its climax as North Vietnamese ground controllers scrambled between 11 and 14 MiG-21 interceptors from Phu Yen Air Base, positioning them for what they expected would be another successful engagement against heavily laden F-105 bombers. The MiG pilots climbed toward their intercept positions with the confidence born of recent victories, unaware that they were approaching the most capable air superiority fighters in the American inventory, flown by crews specifically trained for beyond visual range combat. The stage was set for the largest aerial engagement of the Vietnam War and a demonstration of technological superiority that would revolutionize air combat doctrine for generations to come. At exactly 1500 hours, Colonel Olds' radar operator called out the first contacts appearing on his ANAPQ-120 display screen. Multiple targets climbing from the direction of Phu Yen Air Base, their radar signatures consistent with MiG-21 interceptors, scrambling to engage what they believed were incoming F-105 bombers. The electronic deception had worked perfectly. North Vietnamese ground controllers had committed their most experienced pilots to an engagement that would expose every weakness in Soviet air combat doctrine. Olds keyed his radio, his voice calm despite the adrenaline surge that accompanied the moment every fighter pilot lived for. Olds' flight has multiple contacts, bearing 020, climbing through 20,000 feet. The targets appeared as bright blips on his radar scope, their movement patterns revealing the methodical approach tactics that Soviet doctrine emphasized for intercepts against American bomber formations. The MiG pilots were positioning themselves for the classic one-pass, haul-ass attacks that had proven so effective against heavily laden Thunder Chiefs. The technological gap became immediately apparent as American radar systems tracked the climbing MiGs from distances that rendered the enemy completely blind to the approaching threat. While North Vietnamese pilots relied on ground control vectors and their limited 7-kilometer radar detection range, F-4 crews possessed complete situational awareness of the developing engagement. The AIM-7 Sparrow missiles hanging beneath each Phantom's fuselage could reach out to 35 miles with semi-active radar guidance that made evasion nearly impossible for unaware targets. Senior Lieutenant Nguyen Van Kok led his flight of MiG-21s through the cloud layer, following vectors from ground control that positioned him for what appeared to be another routine intercept against American bombers. His RP-21 radar remained silent, its limited detection cone scanning empty sky as the formation climbed toward the reported target altitude. Soviet training had prepared him for visual range combat, where pilot skill and aircraft agility would determine the outcome, not the beyond visual range missile engagement that was about to unfold. The first Sparrow launch came without warning. Olds' radar operator achieved solid lock on at 28 miles and fired, the AIM-7 missile accelerating to Mach 4 as it homed on its unsuspecting target. The MiG-21 pilot never saw the launch, never received warning from his primitive radar warning receiver, never had opportunity to maneuver defensively. The missile's semi-active radar guidance system tracked the target illuminated by the F-4's powerful radar, closing the distance with mechanical precision that human reflexes couldn't match. Captain Stone watched his radar display as multiple Sparrow launches created a deadly pattern across the sky above North Vietnam. Each F-4 crew had trained extensively for this moment, practicing beyond visual range intercepts until missile employment became instinctive. The technological revolution that Pentagon planners had envisioned was finally being tested against Soviet tactical doctrine in the most direct way possible. Early F-4 variants had carried no internal cannon precisely because American engineers believed radar-guided missiles had made close-in dogfighting obsolete. The engagement evolved with startling speed as AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles joined the Sparrows in flight. While the radar-guided Sparrows engaged targets at maximum range, heat-seeking Sidewinders provided backup capability for closer encounters where infrared signatures became visible. The missile technology represented years of American engineering advancement, creating weapon systems that could engage maneuvering targets at ranges where Soviet pilots had no opportunity to respond with their own limited armament. Koch's wingman disappeared in a brilliant fireball as the first Sparrow found its target, the explosion occurring so suddenly that the surviving MiG pilot initially couldn't comprehend what had happened. No aircraft had been visible in the area, no warning had been received from ground control, no threat indication had appeared on his primitive electronic systems. The reality of beyond visual range combat struck with devastating clarity. American technology had rendered Soviet tactical assumptions obsolete in a matter of seconds. The 15-minute engagement that followed would be remembered as the largest aerial battle of the Vietnam War, but its true significance lay in demonstrating the revolutionary impact of radar-guided missiles on air combat doctrine. F-4 crews used their vertical maneuvering advantages and superior radar systems to maintain engagement geometry that maximized their technological advantages while minimizing exposure to MiG-21 strengths in close-range combat. The Phantom's 16-ton weight, previously mocked as a disadvantage, enabled the installation of radar and weapon systems that completely outclassed lighter Soviet designs. Lieutenant Colonel James led forward flight through a series of coordinated attacks that showcased the tactical possibilities created by beyond visual range combat capability. His crews could engage multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining formation integrity, something impossible during the close-in dogfighting that characterized previous air combat eras. The AN/APQ-120 radar systems provided target tracking information that enabled precise missile employment at distances where enemy pilots remained completely unaware of the incoming threat. The psychological impact on surviving MiG pilots proved as devastating as the physical destruction of their aircraft. Soviet training had prepared them for combat, where both sides would detect each other simultaneously, leading to turning fights where pilot skill and aircraft characteristics would determine the victor. Instead, they faced invisible enemies who could kill from distances that exceeded their understanding of air combat possibilities. The confident aggressiveness that had characterized recent North Vietnamese aerial victories evaporated as pilots realized their tactical assumptions had become liabilities. Stone watched his radar scope as the last MiG contacts faded from the display, either destroyed or fleeing toward the safety of Chinese airspace. The demonstration of American technological superiority had exceeded even the most optimistic predictions. 7 MiG-21s confirmed destroyed, 2 more probably destroyed, with 0 F-4 losses. The mathematics of beyond visual range combat had proven overwhelming when properly employed by well-trained crews using superior equipment against enemies operating under obsolete doctrinal assumptions. The engagement ended as suddenly as it had begun, leaving clear skies over North Vietnam and burning wreckage scattered across the jungle below. American crews had achieved something unprecedented in the history of air warfare: the complete technological domination of an aerial engagement where traditional pilot skills became secondary to electronic systems and missile employment procedures. The age of radar-guided combat had arrived with decisive finality. Weather complications threatened to unravel Operation Bolo as only 3 of the planned 6 F-4 flights reached the target area over Phuoc Yen Air Base. Dense cloud formations had scattered the carefully orchestrated formation, leaving Colonel Olds with just 12 Phantoms instead of the 24 aircraft originally planned for the engagement. Ford Flight under Lieutenant Colonel James and Rambler Flight, led by Captain Stone, had successfully navigated the weather. But the other 3 flights remained scattered across the Southeast Asian sky, fighting through monsoon conditions that reduced visibility to near zero. The tactical disadvantage of reduced numbers became immediately apparent as North Vietnamese ground controllers committed their entire available MiG-21 force to what they believed was a vulnerable American formation. Between 11 and 14 interceptors scrambled from Phuoc Yen, creating numerical odds that would have favored the defenders under traditional air combat conditions. But Operation Bolo was about to demonstrate that technological superiority could overcome numerical disadvantages when properly applied by well-trained air crews. Colonel Olds felt the familiar surge of combat intensity as his radar operator called out multiple climbing contacts. The MiG-21s were emerging from the cloud layer below, their pilots following standard Soviet intercept doctrine that positioned them for surprise attacks against what they expected to be bomb-laden F-105 Thunder Chiefs. The irony was perfect. North Vietnamese pilots were using their most effective tactics against the wrong targets, creating the ideal conditions for beyond visual range missile engagement. The engagement began with startling violence as the first AIM-7 Sparrow found its target at 26 miles range. The MiG-21 pilot never saw the missile launch, never received any warning from his primitive electronic systems, and never had opportunity to take evasive action. The semi-active radar guidance system tracked its target with mechanical precision, the missile's Mach 4 speed covering the distance in less than 90 seconds. The explosion that followed marked the beginning of the most one-sided aerial engagement in aviation history. Senior Lieutenant Nguyen Van Kok watched in horrified confusion as his wingman's aircraft disintegrated without apparent cause. No enemy fighters were visible in the area, no tracers or muzzle flashes had been observed, yet his formation was under attack from invisible adversaries operating at impossible ranges. Soviet training had prepared him for visual combat where both sides would maneuver for tactical advantage, not for this technological nightmare where death arrived without warning from beyond the horizon. Captain Stone achieved his first air-to-air victory as his AIM-7 Sparrow guided perfectly onto a climbing MiG-21, the radar-guided missile demonstrating the devastating effectiveness of American electronic warfare systems. The kill occurred at a range where the enemy pilot's RP-21 radar couldn't even detect the launching aircraft, validating years of technological development that had prioritized beyond visual range combat capability over traditional dogfighting performance. The 15-minute battle that followed would be analyzed by Air Force tacticians for decades, but its immediate impact was overwhelming. F-4 crews used their superior radar systems and vertical maneuvering capability to maintain ideal engagement geometry while launching missile after missile at ranges that Soviet doctrine had never contemplated. The Phantom's ability to track multiple targets simultaneously while guiding semi-active radar missiles created tactical possibilities that completely overwhelmed North Vietnamese defensive measures. Lieutenant Colonel James led Ford Flight through a series of coordinated attacks that showcased the revolutionary nature of radar-guided combat. His crews could engage multiple MiGs simultaneously while maintaining formation integrity, something impossible during close-range dogfighting. The technological advantages built into the F-4 design, massive radar antenna, multiple missile stations, sophisticated fire control systems, were finally being employed under ideal conditions against enemies operating under obsolete assumptions. The human drama reached its climax as Colonel Olds maneuvered his Phantom into position for a close-range Sidewinder shot against a MiG-21 that had somehow survived the initial beyond visual range barrage. When I got down low and behind, he was outlined by the sun against a brilliant blue sky, Olds would later recall. I let him have two Sidewinders, one of which hit and blew his right wing off. The personal skill that had made Olds a double ace in World War II remained relevant, but technology had determined the engagement's outcome before traditional dogfighting skills could influence the result. The statistical reality of Operation Bolo staggered military analysts who had grown accustomed to incremental advantages in air combat. 7 MiG-21s confirmed destroyed, 2 more probably destroyed, with 0 American losses. Of the 14 F-4 crew members who participated in the engagement, only one had ever seen a MiG in combat before January 2nd. The technological gap had proven so overwhelming that experience became secondary to proper employment of superior equipment. The strategic implications became clear within hours as North Vietnamese air defense commanders realized they had lost more than half their operational MiG-21 force in a single engagement. The carefully husbanded interceptor fleet that had dominated American formations for months lay scattered in burning wreckage across the jungle. Soviet tactical doctrine had been tested against American technology under ideal conditions, and the results could not be disputed or rationalized away. The psychological impact on surviving North Vietnamese pilots proved as devastating as the physical destruction of their aircraft. Men who had grown confident in their ability to defeat American formations through superior tactics and aggressive flying now faced the reality that their enemies possessed weapon systems that could kill without warning from impossible distances. The technological revolution that American engineers had promised was no longer theoretical. It had been demonstrated with deadly precision over the skies of North Vietnam. Captain Stone felt profound satisfaction as intelligence reports confirmed the engagement's strategic impact. North Vietnamese air operations ceased almost entirely for several months following Operation Bolo, as commanders struggled to develop new tactics that could counter American beyond visual range capabilities. A follow-up deception on January 6th destroyed 2 more MiG-21s, bringing total North Vietnamese losses to 9 of 16 operational aircraft. The age of radar-guided air combat had announced itself with decisive finality, rendering close-range cannon fighting obsolete and establishing American technological dominance that would reshape air warfare doctrine for generations to come.